One of the things that I was most excited about when I found out we would be going to Taiwan for the summer was definitely the opportunity to see so many different types of wildlife in other parts of the world. And thankfully, that's really easy to do in Taipei. There are so many parks and there's so many gardens. Everywhere I turn, there's plants and pots and small spots where people have set up areas for the cats and the birds to enjoy. Bird seed and cat food is absolutely everywhere. But what really surprised me is just how many larger birds there are in this big city too. Often overhead, I would see egrets and ibis fly over with their beautiful S-shaped necks, and I was wondering just where they were going. And it turns out the majority of them were headed for Daan Forest Park, where there is a huge stretch of grass and trees that the birds can enjoy, and so many spots for them to search for food in all of the grass, where the worms and other bugs are coming up because of all of the rain from rainy season. The big, beautiful egrets were, of course, not the only birds that we found at the park either. The park was covered in its usual assortment of pigeons, doves, and tree sparrows that you can see in most big cities all over the world. But what I thought was really charming is the way that people would leave so much birdseed out, even for these really common city birds to enjoy. However, the most spectacular sight wasn't the city pigeons. It was the ecological pond, where dozens of egrets and herons stood preening their feathers in the rain, enjoying the shelter of a cluster of trees that made an island in the center of the water. We couldn't believe the sheer number of birds. There were more egrets there than we have seen in one place since we visited Bald Head Island in North Carolina last year. They looked like beautiful white flowers, sitting perched in the trees, and there were so many different kinds of birds there too. The longer we watched the pond, the more species we seemed to see. Beautiful little egrets with their long white feathers, carefully preening each piece into place, that stood perched next to cranky-looking brown and white night herons, who peered out at us from the shadows of the leaves. And below, in the water, common ducks muttered to one another and nibbled at water weeds, while cheerful moorhens swam laps around sleeping turtles. Long-necked and wide-winged birds flew back and forth over our heads as the egrets came back from foraging in the grasses of the park for fresh worms or other insects chased up from the rain. While it seemed to be spectacular to us that they would fly so close overhead, the birds were clearly adapted to city life. They could have cared less that we were watching them with open mouths and ignored us entirely. The best part of the pond, however, wasn't just the diversity of birds to watch. It was also the fact that the cattle egrets had gathered in large numbers, and they had dozens of nestlings hanging from the island's branches. Cattle egrets have successfully spread across much of the world over the last century. As a result, they are known by many names. One of the charming things about these birds is that those names tend to change depending on what species the birds are most associated with in different areas. Because no matter where they go, cattle egrets prefer to forage for food alongside large grazing herbivores, who stir up the bugs and small animals that make up the egret's diet. In places where that means grazing alongside cattle, they are known as cow cranes. But in other parts of the world, they are known as rhinoceros egrets or even hippopotamus egrets. They are found mostly in areas that have marshes, lakes, swamps, riverside woods, or upland forest, though they can be found along many marine shorelines and especially farm fields as well. They have very broad diets that have helped them to adapt to their expanding territories. While they mostly eat insects, they will also eat fish, frogs, reptiles, small mammals, and even birds. However, it is their habit of eating insects off of the backs of large herbivores, such as cows, that have earned them their distinctive names. Though if there are no cattle, the cattle egret will follow large farm machinery or even fires that chase insects and small creatures out into the open. There were certainly no large cows or farm fields where we were so deep within the big city of Taipei, but these cattle egrets seem to be flourishing just fine. And based off of all the professional birders and photographers who appeared as the rain eased up, they were regulars to Daan Park's ecological pond as well. Though that may be because the ecological pond was the perfect place for the cattle egret to raise their nestlings. In the center of the pond was a mass of trees and bushes whose twisted branches made a perfect tangle for the gangly, clumsy young egrets to crawl all over. Even when they fell from their nest or were overeager in chasing a parent to demand more food and nearly tumbled into the water, it was easy for them to regain their footing and climb back up. The nestlings themselves were a few weeks old by now. No longer young and vulnerable, they had reached the point of being surprisingly aggressive as they swarmed their parents demanding food. Every time an adult would get near or land, the nestlings would start yelling for their attention, then pounce the parent and aggressively grab the adult's beak and shake it hard if the parent wasn't fast enough with giving them food. I recognized the motion they were making as the same motion the nestlings would experience if the parent had stuck their beak into their mouths to give them food, but it seemed like the nestlings hadn't realized that by taking the initiative to bite the parent's beak first, they were not able to get fed even if the poor adult had wanted to give them food. Out of everything I saw at the park, it was the hungry, demanding, aggressive nestlings that surprised me the most, especially the way they would aggressively shove one another out of the way for food, driven by their urge to be fed and survive. Not all the birds on the little island took kindly to the jostling, aggressive nestlings, however. More than once, I saw a few night herons lose their temper and jump down from the branches above, landing on top of the noisy nestlings and squawking at them until the nestlings gave them more room. The preening white egrets and content moorhens completely ignored them, however, and simply carried on with their activities in the light rain. Still, all this aggression by the nestlings had a point: survival. Cattle egrets enjoy the benefit of flocking together year-round, thus providing more protection than the lone bird traveling on their own would have. But before the egrets can fly off to forage for food in the surrounding grasses of the park, they have to survive hatching and fledging from their nest. Competition for food from a sibling, an inattentive parent, or neglecting to shove your way forward to get enough of what food is available could spell the end for a young bird before they even manage to take wing and explore the surrounding city on their own. So although the aggressive young were surprising to me, and I'll admit I laughed rather hard watching the fledglings rattle their poor parents around demanding food, for these birds, it's all done in the name of survival. And walking away from the park and back into the busy city streets of Taipei, I couldn't help but feel the contrast between the wild struggle carrying on among dozens of birds behind me and the bustling modern city in front of me. I often hear from so many people that they cannot believe how I seem to find so much wildlife where I live. But here I was, in the middle of a huge city with millions of people, and I had just had the opportunity to witness something beautiful and wild, with buildings, highways, skyscrapers, subways, not but a few feet away. As always, it is a matter of where you look, not just where you are. Of course, without Daan Park and the people who put the work in to create these green spaces, that small pond and its many wild dramas wouldn't have found a foothold in the busy city of Taipei. It is thanks to the people who built and care for the park and the people who support it that we were able to see such an amazing sight. A sliver of wild, right here in the heart of the big city.